the way of the Lord. Prepare ye the way of the Lord.
This material is coming from a book that I recently discovered. And the title of the book is The Secret Second Coming: What If the Church Got It Wrong? And it is written by Patricia Doyle. The bulk of our presentation is coming from this book. And the book is about a medium whose name is James Edward Padgett. He was born on August 25th, 1852, same year my house was built. He was an Orthodox Methodist, and he taught Sunday school at the Trinity Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. So we're having someone who's coming through a quite rigid Christian background, who suddenly became a medium. He developed his mediumship at the age of 62, and he never charged for his services. His wife, Helen, died in February of 1914. He, of course, was grief-stricken and eventually consulted a medium. And the medium had a very remarkable message for him. And the message was that he had a rare gift of automatic writing. As you probably know, the gift of automatic writing is when a person enters into an altered state and spirit will put their hand over the medium's hand, similar to a parent putting their hand over a child when they're teaching them how to write. And the medium releases all control of their arm. They just it's just there, okay? They're not physically moving it. And spirit is the one that is starting to move their hand to cause them to write. So that the message that's coming through is not going through the medium's mind at all, but directly to the directly being written down. Some automatic writers hold their pens like that, and they can hold a conversation with another physical person, and the pen is busy writing away. Even if they were holding the pen in a more traditional manner, it would be the same thing. Their hand is moving, but they're not really concentrating on what the message is. The message is coming from spirit. Spirit is moving their hand, and it has nothing to do with the medium. This automatic writing medium, her name is Grace Rosner, and she was the one who we saw the pictures here of how she held her pen, which is quite an unusual way for writing. So going back to James Edward Padgett, again, remember, he's coming from an Orthodox Christian background. So a lot of this is quite difficult for him to understand. His first attempts at automatic writing weren't successful. And that's true for many automatic mediums. It takes a while for them to learn to give up control and to be in a passive enough state for them to have spirit write through them. And then he started to receive short messages from his wife, Helen. She said she was often with him, was happy, and can communicate with him. Typical messages that spirits from the spirit world come to give the people who are still in the physical world. Padgett wanted further proof. In the next session, Helen provided facts that only she and he knew. So that obviously helped the situation. But as with many aspects of mediumship, the medium's questions whether it's coming from his own mind or is it coming from the spirit. So he believed that he was writing his own thoughts, but he was writing faster than his own thoughts were forming. Again, we were talking that often there's a disconnect between what the hand's doing and the medium's mind. So he noticed that. He noticed that the words are forming on the paper a lot faster than he's even thinking it, which then he has to come to the conclusion that it's not his mind. But it did spark his curiosity. How's this happening? and he began to study spiritualism. And Helen's writings at that point started to become more spiritual and less personal. She proved to him that it was her, so she didn't have to keep proving to him that it was her. So she could branch out into other topics. Then the writings informed Padgett that Jesus was still interested in helping humanity. And Jesus wanted to write messages through James Padgett. Padgett was very skeptical that Jesus would write through him. And he even tore up the first message that was signed Jesus from the Bible. On September 28th, 1914, Jesus wrote his first formal message through Padgett. He urged Padgett to pray for God's love. And then he stated that many things that are in the Bible are wrong. This message brought much conflict to Padgett, for it contradicted his religious beliefs. Now, I totally understand what that feels like, because when years ago, when Carl was channeling Awan would say the same thing. He would say he was the one who told me that there was a lot of mistakes in the Bible, and the Bible had been edited, and that totally contradicted my Jewish background, what I was taught. And it took me a very long time to reconcile that and to come to realize that Awan was right and I had been misled. Eventually, he accepted the writings of Jesus. Now, Jesus had many things to teach Padgett. The first thing, the medium must have complete faith that spirits who are real, who can control the brain, hand, and soul of the medium. What we talked about earlier in our service about intent. So, if the medium has the intent of being available to serve spirit and has the intent to hand off to spirit, in other words, to allow spirit to use their physical body, to use their hand in this case, to write a message, that is very crucial, because if they don't believe it, then how can spirit take over their hand? There has to be this cooperation between the medium and the spirit, and so the medium has to have the faith or the belief or the knowingness that spirit will work through them. And often that doesn't come right away. It's the more one pursues mediumship, the more one realizes that spirit is there working. The medium must obey spirit's instruction and pray for divine guidance and divine love. What started to happen was Jesus was not the only person from the Bible who came to write through him. So John the Apostle came through one time and said, to receive messages of higher truths, the medium must have spiritual thoughts. So think about that. If a medium's really into materialistic ideas and materialistic thoughts, how in the world is a spiritual thought supposed to come through that person? So by trying to lead a more spiritual life, you are enabling a contact with a higher spirit, a spirit with a higher amount of spirituality to come through you and to teach through you. We now come to where Jesus starts to talk about mistakes in the Bible. Jesus wrote, "The Bible contains many truths and many of my sayings, but also many statements that were never made by me or the apostles, and my mission is now to correct these errors." Now, many of you know that our founder, who's pictured here, Reverend Carl R. Hewitt, had communication with Jesus. In fact, Jesus spoke to Carl when he was a little boy. He didn't identify himself. And in fact, throughout most of Carl's life, he didn't know who that voice belonged to until 1999, when it was made known that Jesus informed him that, yes, the voice, this is my voice, this is Jesus, I've been talking to you all your life. And Carl was a bit annoyed. He said, "Don't you think that was important for me to know all my life?" But there was no response. Anyhow, one of the things that Jesus told Carl was that the verse, "In my Father's house are many mansions," was really a mistranslation, and it should have been, "In my Father's house are many dimensions." And what I often wondered was why that was all Jesus had to say on the matter. He never spoke about the other mistakes in the Bible with Carl. He only did that one, and that always baffled me until this week when I got through this book and I read it, and I said, "Oh, no wonder he didn't tell Carl anything else. He told it through another medium. Why waste the energy to reteach something that already exists? This information happened in the 1910s, 100 years ago. This happened. It's unfortunate that nobody has heard about it very much, but it's been around. So why would Jesus repeat the information? He gave Carl something new that wasn't given to Padgett. Jesus also said, "And the sayings to the effect that my blood saves from sin are erroneous, and my disciples never wrote that false doctrine." Well, that would disturb a lot of Christians because they believe that Jesus is going to be their savior and that he died for their sins and all that other dogma. And Jesus is saying that this is not true. My blood has nothing to do with the redemption of mankind from sin. Jesus wrote, "For I never was God, neither did I ever create any part of the universe. I was only a spirit of God sent by him to work out man's salvation and show him the only way to the heavenly home." We're now going to see some information that was written by St. Luke. And Luke, again, is one of the authors of one of the Gospels. And Luke writes, "In my Gospel, as now contained in the authorized version," meaning the King James Version, the one that Christians quote so much, "there are many things that have been interpolated. This version was not based on what I wrote, but upon the pretended copies of my writings. And the persons who made these copies did not follow literally my writings, but added to my text and gave their own interpretations of what I had written in such a way as to destroy the true meaning of what was intended to be conveyed by my writing." This is exactly what Awan said through Carl Hewitt. "Religious leaders have altered the Bible for their own purposes." And this is what sent me on a tizzy for so long, because I didn't believe that. So here we have the same corroborating thoughts happening 100 some odd years later than what happened when it was first stated with Mr. Padgett. St. Luke goes on to say, "I never wrote that Jesus commanded his disciples to believe that the wine was his blood or the bread his body, and to eat and drink these things in remembrance of him." So what that's saying is that the whole communion service is not really something that Jesus initiated. That was something created to influence the people's thinking. Jesus wrote, "My spiritual guidance showing the way to the celestial kingdom was not well understood, not even by my intimate disciples." It's interesting that he says that because Carl used to teach something a slight bit different. Carl said that Jesus' main mission was to teach the gifts of the Spirit, to teach his disciples how to be mediums and to communicate with the spirit world. And he said that most of them weren't getting it, and that Carl used to refer to them as flunkies, and that it was only Peter, James, and John, the ones he took up to the Mount of Transfiguration, that were developing it all. This is the way Carl talked about it. And yet Jesus is kind of saying the same thing, that his disciples really didn't understand his teachings. They weren't really getting it. So it's interesting to see the same content being corroborated from different sources, almost a century apart. Jesus wrote, The world needs a new awakening, and the infidelity and the unbelief of men who think themselves wise, but who are foolish as they will ultimately find out, and the material things must not fill their souls much longer, or they will suffer more than they can imagine. The material needs of mankind are not the only clouds that must be lifted from their souls. So what Jesus is talking about is that for many people living on the earth plane now, their sole goal is materialistic wealth, materialistic gain, and they have no interest in spiritual things, no interest in helping other people. They just want to get more and more material things. And Jesus is saying that this will eventually go away and change. Jesus wrote, I know that it is believed and taught and emphasized, and men place all their hopes and expectations of a heaven of bliss on the statement that I will be at some time come in the clouds of heaven with a great shout to the earth, and by the power which they believe exists in me, establish a kingdom of God, a kind of kingdom in which I will be the king and rule supreme and receive my subjects, those who believe in and worship me, and send those who do not into eternal damnation and outer wickedness. Well, this is a pitiable, untrue, and all erroneous. So the people who believe that Jesus is going to sit and judge them in the spirit world are totally being misled. Jesus is not interested in any of that dogma, in any of that, because it's not the way it's going to happen. Regarding the prophecy of Matthew 24 about the end of the world, Jesus writes that it referred to the fall of Jerusalem. As you know, a couple of decades after Jesus died, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. The temple was destroyed, and the Jewish people who were living there were taken and dispersed into other countries. So that is what Jesus was talking about when they wrote the end of the world. Jesus writes in an early message to Padgett, my coming to you is really my second coming on earth, and the result of my coming in this way will satisfy and fulfill all the promises of the scriptures as to my second coming. So let your belief in this important fact, and I can't see that on my screen, you will have in your souls and minds no doubt as to what my present mission is, and as to what your work will be in making known to men my real purpose in revealing to them the great truths of the Father. So what he is saying is something that Carl used to talk about. Carl used to say that Jesus is not going to physically come back again, but it is the return of the interest in the spirit world, the return of the spirit, of people communicating with spirit on their own, which is going to be the second coming. Jesus is saying this message is the second coming. I am coming through you through the gifts of automatic writing and expressing my thoughts to you and correcting the mistakes that were made in your teachings for centuries. And this is my second coming. Jesus also wrote, the world needs a new awakening and an infidelity and an unbelief in men who think of themselves wise, but who are foolish, as they will ultimately find out, and that all material things must not fill their souls. We will eventually have harmony and peace on earth. Evil will be eradicated. It is a matter of time, and the timing depends on us. That all men will ultimately be brought into harmony with God is either the natural love or in the higher one is certain. And that all sin and error will finally be eradicated from God's universe is decreed. But the time will depend on a great extent upon the wills and the desire of men. So as with most prophecies, the timing of it is very difficult to nail down. So while Jesus is saying there will be a time when harmony and peace will prevail on this earth, he could not say exactly when it would happen. So we're now going to leave the information from the book, The Second Coming, Secret Second Coming, and I'm going to talk to you about briefly about a website, which is www.jameseastpadgett.com. So there's information about this particular medium on this website. There is his biography, if you're interested in learning more about him himself. There's also 3 books based on the messages, writing messages that were given. The Genuine Jesus is a channeled autobiography of Jesus. There's a New Testament of Spiritualism. Again, this is all based on Padgett's writings, and Spiritualism and Beyond, where it talks about different aspects of spiritualism. So this brings us to the end of this presentation.